Welcome to the Forum Guide to Data Ethics online course. Ethics, a set of principles of proper conduct, the rules or standards governing the conduct of a person or the members of a profession. Ethics have always been important, but they rarely get much attention until someone behaves in an unethical manner. Ethics are especially relevant in the public sector. Political leaders, courts, government employees, and schools are justifiably expected to conduct business in a manner that efficiently and effectively uses public resources, while at the same time guaranteeing our rights as citizens. In other words, they are expected to perform their responsibilities in an ethical manner. Ethics are manifested in many ways in an education organization. Principals are obliged to treat each child fairly. Teachers are required to create a classroom atmosphere conducive to learning. Cafeteria workers are responsible for protecting the identity of children receiving free or reduced price meals. Board members are charged to help schools function in accordance with laws, standards, norms, and best practices in the field. And administrators are obligated to ensure that school resources are used as they were intended, without mismanagement, fraud, or abuse. Each and every day, educators collect and use data about students, staff, and schools. Some of these data originate in individual student or staff records that are confidential or otherwise sensitive, and even information that is a matter of public record. Aggregate school enrollment, for example, needs to be accessed, presented, and used in a responsible manner. While laws may set the legal parameters that govern data use, ethics establish the fundamental principles of right and wrong that are critical to the appropriate management and use of education data. The exponential growth of information systems that provide ready access to education data, often drawing upon individual student records, has heightened the importance of training data users about their ethical responsibilities regarding how they appropriately access, use, share, and manage education data. Technology makes data readily available to many staff members in an education organization. It also raises issues about the appropriate use of data, because the power to transmit information electronically multiplies the consequences of irresponsible behavior. How much more vulnerable are we to the inappropriate disclosure of information, for example, a student's assessment results, grades, medical history, in the age of downloads, copy and paste, and web posting, than we were when cumulative folders could be locked away in a file cabinet? How much easier is it now to create a technically accurate but misleading presentation to policymakers or the public, for example, manipulating the axes on graphs to give the wrong impression about data trends? Laws may set the legal parameters in which data users operate, but ethics go deeper and are often more stringent. After all, it is usually not illegal to change the axis on a graph, but it is unethical to intentionally represent data in a manner that is likely to be misunderstood. This course outlines a code of ethics for data management and use in education settings. All core principles, called canons, examples, descriptions, and recommendations in this document reflect situations that arise in real schools, school districts, and state education agencies. The best practices presented in Part 2 are intended to supplement existing policies in education organizations or serve as a template when organizations create new policies. The Forum Guide to Data Ethics online course is designed for a broad range of stakeholders in the education data community. It addresses ethical issues related to the management and use of education data. While formal and systematic training is necessary to fully implement the recommendations in this course, the goal of this material is to make ethical principles understandable and actionable to education staff as they work with data in their organizations. Although the world is full of good people, ethical behavior does not just happen automatically in an organization. People may be tempted to engage in unethical behavior, to knowingly manipulate or misrepresent statistics to make a point, misuse data for personal gain, or convince themselves that privacy and confidentiality requirements don't need to be observed. Collecting, maintaining, reporting, and using data in an appropriate manner that is consistent throughout the organization and in all decisions will not happen unless education leaders support data ethics as an important organizational priority. Ethical behavior oftentimes can be encouraged through organizational structures and operational expectations. For example, a responsible system of checks and balances precludes finance officers from signing their own expense reports without anyone else's oversight. By establishing standard procedures for collecting data, generating and reviewing reports, releasing publications, and communicating with the public, an education organization limits the opportunities for inappropriate behavior. Organizations must actively ensure that all data handlers adhere to all policies and procedures related to data ethics. To help data handlers understand and exhibit standards of ethical behavior, education organizations should train staff about their ethical responsibilities, publicize the expectations for ethical behavior, create explicit policies and procedures pertaining to data ethics, state clearly the consequences of unethical behavior, and enforce these rules uniformly so that everyone is accountable. Ethics training requires a resource commitment from school leaders, securing skilled trainers, tailoring curricula to the organization's and learners' needs, and allocating professional development time for staff to learn and practice new behaviors. In addition to describing ethical concepts, training should discuss why ethics matter, ethical issues are real and have significant consequences, and how ethics play out in everyday situations in the organization. That is, how they affect the routine activities of the training participants. Realistic examples customized to the learner's roles and responsibilities are a good way to communicate the real-life implications and unexpected complexities of the principles described in this course. The responsibility for data ethics ultimately rests with an organization's leadership. Nonetheless, appropriate ethical behavior in accessing, using, and managing education data is the responsibility of each and every individual with access to information in an education organization. This includes, but is not limited to, your organization's superintendent, chief information officer, principals, teachers, registrars, counselors, school board members, data manager, technology director, information systems staff, data stewards, technical staff, office staff, paraprofessionals, volunteers, and vendors. Each ethical canon in this course is presented in the following manner. Category: a broad classification used to organize the canons in this document. The categories, personal, professional, integrity, data quality, and security, can be thought of as the overarching drivers of ethical behavior. These categories are used to organize the course content, and there is overlap across categories. Canon: the core ethical principle being presented and discussed. Vignette: an example that illustrates how an ethical canon is relevant to the real world. These fictional examples cite various settings and circumstances related to data handlers, because this group has been identified as the primary audience for this course. Discussion: an explanation of the canon that provides context for understanding the ethical principles being addressed. Recommended practices and training: a bulleted list of activities and tasks that would contribute to achieving the ethical principles represented by the canon. The lists of recommended practices are illustrative rather than exhaustive, and they are intended to represent some of the most fundamental activities that can be undertaken to advance a canon. Here are some terms you will see in this course. Some terms that are used interchangeably in conversation have very specific and distinctive meanings as they are used in these canons. Personally identifiable information: data that can be used to identify a person or that can be used in conjunction with other information. For example, by linking records to identify a person. This includes a student's name, the name of the student's parent or other family member, the address of the student, a personal identifier such as the Social Security number or student number, a list of personal characteristics that would make the student's identity traceable, or any other information that would make the student's identity traceable. Private information. Data that are classified as uniquely personal and therefore neither available for public release nor accessible without a verified need to know for the purposes of providing approved educational services. Private information in a school record often includes course selection, academic performance, aptitude scores, health information, and discipline data. Confidential information. Data that have been guaranteed to be maintained confidentially, i.e., that will not be released, regardless of their nature, as private or sensitive. Sensitive information. Those data that are confidential and/or vital to an organization as it carries out its mission. For example, data about class assignments are both confidential, data about student course selection are private, and vital to the school's core instructional mission. Principals should know where students need to be at every moment of the day. General information. Those data that are generally helpful, but not confidential and/or vital to an organization as it carries out its mission. For example, a data file with help instructions for website users is a general support component within a data system. While the files are important to users facing a web problem, the data are not vital to running a school or school system, nor are they private in nature or otherwise subject to confidentiality restrictions. These terms and definitions are available in printed form in the glossary document in the additional materials section of this course.